So over the past year, people have been looking at expanding the context window of large language models. And we saw this very early on where people went to 8,000 token windows to 16,000, I think, for one of the early GPT 3.5s, right up to, I think, 32,000 for GPT-4 when it launched. And then, of course, this was all blown out of the water as people then expanded to 128,000. And Google Gemini 1.5 came out with a 1 million token context window. And while that was all fantastic, the thing that people weren't talking about was the context window for going into the model. The models themselves still basically only output sort of 2,000, maybe 4,000 tokens if you were lucky. And that often meant even getting 100,000 tokens in, it was struggling to get an LLM to write an article that was 1,000 words long, or to basically come up with something that was a couple of thousand words long. And in many ways, this has stayed. Now, we've seen that some of the OpenAI models have expanded out to a longer context out for producing tokens. But on the whole, people are still being heavily limited to what they could actually generate in one pass out of a large language model. So that brings us to LongWriter. So LongWriter is a new project that comes out of the Tsinghua University. And they've produced some quite nice models in the past. They're the creators of the GLM models that early on, while I didn't make videos about them, they were actually some nice, interesting models. Anyway, they've come at this problem and decided to basically build a large language model where you can generate 10,000 words out. And that's the goal of this. So they've released a fine-tuned version of one of their models. They've released a paper, and they describe their whole process for doing this in here. So just to start off, let's look at the LongWriter chat model compared to the standard GLM 9B chat model. So this is the original model and a fine-tuned version of the model here. And we can see that both models are generating tokens very quickly, but we can see that the one on the right basically finishes at 1,896 words. We can see that the one on the left keeps going for 7,872 words. And this video fits some of the tests that I've done today with it, where generally the LongWriter seems to be able to write about 4x normally what you're seeing a sort of standard LLM output here. In this case, that being a little bit under 8,000 words in here. In their paper, they talk about generating 10,000 plus words in just 1 minute for doing this. So it's pretty cool that they've done this, and they've actually released two models. So the first model that they've released is the GLM 9B LongWriter, but they've also released a Llama 3 8 billion LongWriter model as well. So this pretty much is a drop-in replacement for what you've already been using if you've been using one of the Llama 3 models. So if we look at their paper, and I'm not going to go deep into the paper in here, but we can see that there's a few key factors that they're doing here. First of all, they discover that really most models can be trained to have this long context output. It's something that most of the models can do, but they need to have supervised fine-tuning to do that. What that requires is a data set, and they've got a data set of 6,000 examples that range between 2,000 words right up to 32,000 words here. And they find that by just training with that supervised fine-tuning data set, which they've made public, and you can actually check it out and play around with it on Hugging Face data sets. And already I can see other people are starting to train with this particular data set. We see that just by training with that kind of data set, they're able to get these models to perform a lot better. Then they add in some things like some DPO for alignment training and that kind of thing. Another thing that I think is really interesting about this whole project is how do they actually come up with a data set that has articles that are 2,000 to 32,000 words long? So one of the cool things about the paper is that they go into the details of how they created AgentWrite. So this idea of AgentWrite here is that they can use an agent and some control flow to be able to get the LLM to plan out an article and then have it write in different chunks so that it can write the first part, write the second part, third part, etc. And you can see in this example here in their diagram is that they go out from part 1 to part 15 of writing about the Roman Empire. And they're able then to see, okay, when do they get to the right length? And by adding in some control checking and some other things like this, they're able to use the agent to generate lots of long articles, which they then end up using for doing their supervised fine tuning to have a model that can just do this coherently and can output an article of 8,000, 10,000, etc. So the cool thing is both the dataset is up on Hugging Face. They've put all of the code for the agent and stuff like that up on GitHub. And they've also made both the GLM model and the Llama 3.1 model available on Hugging Face as well for you to try. In the paper, they also go into a new evaluation benchmark that they've got for LongBench and LongBench Ruler. And looking at the evaluations that they have in here, they're clearly beating some of the proprietary models. And my guess is that just like they say in the actual paper, if those proprietary models were trained on their data set, you could imagine that those models would do quite nicely as well. Okay, so as all good projects now seem to basically have a Hugging Face space up there, they've also put the GLM4 9 billion model up on Hugging Face spaces so you can have a play with this. I came in here with a simple prompt, write me a guide for promoting a nightclub in NYC. And the reason that I chose this, it was different than all the travel guides that they're promoting in their paper, etc. And you can see that this has generated a quite nice long output that is very respectable and it goes on and stuff like that. If I take this and drop this into Google Docs, we can see sure enough that this is 3,600 words long, which is not bad for an article around an obscure topic that they've got here. Okay, so asking this to write me a 10,000 word article out, 10,000 word guide to Italy, highlight all the Roman things that I can see in detail and include when and how is best to go and see them. Okay, and it's kicking off. And my guess is it's going to basically take a little bit of time. I'm not sure what GPU we're running on here. Okay, so generating out the second article about Italy. We can see that it's nowhere near what we hoped. It was still well over 2,000 words, which is it's still pretty impressive. It's still a few thousand tokens out. Looking at the quality of the article, it's pretty decent. Although, like I said, it could, certainly be longer in here. But part of this may be due to the fact that I've run out of GPU quota for this Hugging Face space in here. Okay, so what I thought I would do was actually try out the Llama 3.1 version of LongWriter. So I've just got transformers set up here. This is certainly not optimized for speed. They have a VLLM version that you can use as well, which would be better if you're going to go for something for speed, etc. And I'm actually only using an L4 here. I did try it with a T4, but it just seemed to take forever with that. So I've gone for an L4 GPU in here. As you can see, I'm bringing in the LongWriter Llama 3.1 8B and just using their code and their prompt for the first one. And asking it to write a China travel guide. And sure enough, it writes a very long China travel guide. So what I've done for each of these is I've copied this over to a Google Doc, and we can go look at the length in there. Okay, so as you can see here, looking at their China travel guide, it's just under 10,000 words, right? 9,577 words. So it's definitely getting longer when I'm doing it myself as opposed to using the Hugging Face space in here. I did start to wonder, they trained it for the travel guide and stuff like that. So I thought, okay, I would try out a guide to knitting, something that they probably didn't train it for. And if we come into Google Docs, I've copied over the guide for knitting. It turns out that it's just over 10,000 words for this one. So it does seem that the model is pretty consistent. I still decided to give it a couple of more tries. So after giving it a couple of more tries, the next one was for underwater kickboxing. Certainly a niche topic, something that you're going to find probably huge amounts of info out there. But even for this, it was still able to get around 8,400 words out for this. And I will say that the quality of these, the quality seems good. But definitely, if you wanted to actually use this kind of model, I would suggest what you do is you use the agent for creating your at least sort of a helping data set for that. And then perhaps you fine tune your own model with their data set and your own to basically, go through this. The final one that I tried in here was actually getting away from nonfiction stuff and trying to get it to do a fiction piece. And even for the fiction writing, you can see here that it's generated out a bit under 7,000 words. So these are all words, by the way, not tokens, right? I'm measuring this in Google Docs in here. And if you look on the side here, I ended up having 110 pages of text that was generated just in 4 or 5, different runs of this model. So clearly, this is something that can generate lots of text out. Like I said, if you do want to use it for a specific use, I suggest you make your own data set to enhance their data set and then, fine tune on this. So overall, I thought this was a really interesting project to look at, and I encourage you to go and have a play with it yourself and see how it goes. I still think a lot of the interesting parts of this particular project are the agent that does the writing to make the data set. The whole idea of using an agent to make a data set is becoming far more common. The ability to make synthetic data with getting agents to do certain things, we're finding is becoming key to being able to fine-tune models to get them to respond in the way a particular company or a particular organization wants that model to respond in. So this is definitely an interesting project to look at this and to see, okay, how do the nuts and bolts of the whole thing sort of work, of making the data set with an agent, fine-tuning a model, even like the Llama 3 model with that, and then having a model that can generate much longer outputs than we're seeing from standard models, even including some of the really big proprietary models in here. As always, if you found the video useful, please click like and subscribe. If you've got any comments or any questions, please, put them below. Certainly interesting to talk about where these things are going. I may have a look at AgentWrite. Got a few ideas of maybe how we could have a play with that in another video going forward. But for now, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time. Bye for now.